Hello and welcome to another episode of Two Guys and a Chainsaw. I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
So we're about to wrap up our tribute episodes here of people that we lost in 2020. Today's actress actually made it to 2021, but soon died in the hospital of complications related to, I believe, a urinary tract infection that just got bad and worse and had her on a ventilator. And sadly, her longtime husband couldn't even visit her in the hospital because of the COVID restrictions. So
it's so sad.
Yeah, it is pretty sad, right? But anyway, let's not talk about the sadness. Let's talk about the life of one Tanya Roberts. Tanya Roberts was born Victoria Lee Bloom, but changed her name to Tanya Roberts to kick off her modeling and acting career. She started out as a model in the 70s.
Big surprise.
Yeah, I know, right?
She's ugly as sin.
I know.
No, she's stunningly gorgeous.
Oh my gosh. And especially in this movie as well. It just, I mean, her eyes sparkle and she's quite nice. She didn't always get the best reviews for her acting. I thought that in this movie, which is 1979's Tourist Trap, also, by the way, recommended to us by Ryan. Thank you, Ryan, for that. As soon as you saw that she had died, you had mentioned on our Facebook page that we ought to do a tribute to her. This is, I think, one of the only horror movies she's done. She's most known for coming in, I think, at the last season of Charlie's Angels.
Yeah.
Replacing one of the other actresses in a bid to kind of revitalize the series as it was declining, but that didn't quite work. She was a Bond girl, I believe. She was a geologist in A View to a Kill.
And with the whole Charlie's Angels thing, in those later seasons, they were switching girls out, People were coming and going, and she was the last one. But to her credit, she was a big fan favorite, and the whole last season really revolved around her. She was the center of most of the storylines in that season, and she was well received. So there's that.
Yeah. She was in some movies like The Beastmaster. I think one of her earliest films was an R-rated remake of a pornographic movie called Forced Entry.
Oh, ew.
Yeah, right? If you can imagine. But this one, Tourist Trap, was 1979, and it was produced by Charles Band. We know Charles Band pretty well.
Yep.
His line of productions is a mile long, and this is probably one of his earlier ones. I think maybe one of his fifth or sixth productions. You guys know him as a producer of a lot, like the Puppet Master series, the Dolls. A lot of movies, actually, that we've kind of enjoyed, and then a lot of movies that are just plain dumb and straight-to-video fare.
Well, that's the thing. As a producer, he's just so prolific. He's put out so many movies, and they're pretty low budget, and some of them are pretty schlocky, but it's kind of hit and miss. You and I have enjoyed a lot of those movies.
We have, for various reasons.
Right. And of course, when we talk about them, there's always criticism, but there's also a lot of entertainment value in a lot of his movies. So I don't know, of course, I certainly don't have my finger on the pulse of Hollywood elites and how those people view these types of productions or whatever. But from a public perspective, from a fan perspective, I've really kind of come to respect Charles Band.
Yeah.
Yes, some of those movies are bad, but some of them are a lot of fun. And this one, I wouldn't say it's one of my favorites, but it's very interesting.
Yeah. It's nothing if not interesting, yes, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really all over the map. I mean, I feel like this movie is cobbled together from a lot of other movies, honestly. You've got a little bit of Texas Chainsaw Massacre in there, a little bit of House of Wax, a little bit of Psycho, and then some weird kind of The Fury type Carrie stuff almost in there.
Carrie, yeah.
It's just so all over the map that I think it was a little confusing for me at first to put a pin in what was going on. And maybe that's to the movie's credit in a way. It sounds kind of derivative, and so maybe it is kind of derivative, but in deriving its material from all of these different places and putting together something very odd and strange, strangely compelling to watch at times, a little boring at other times.
Yeah.
It is, in its own way, a little original. Yeah. So, that could be said. The screenplay was written by David Schmoller and J. Larry Carroll, and was originally pitched to Charles Band, and they really wanted John Carpenter to direct this.
Yeah.
But John Carpenter was too expensive, so it came back, and they said, look, Charles Band himself said, look, David Schmoller, why don't you direct this movie instead? So this was actually his very first directing gig. But then after that, David Schmoller went on to do Puppet Master. He did a horror movie called The Arrival, Possessed, a bunch of episodes of Silk Stockings on TV. Just a lot of random stuff, but mostly kind of in this lower budget television or, direct-to-video horror kind of thing. So he said that he learned a lot directing this movie about just how to do that, how to direct actors and how to direct actresses. So for a first-time director working with some stars, the male antagonist in this movie is very, very well known, Chuck Connors, who's kind of a legend of the screen and television, honestly.
Yeah.
I always visually, depending on the role he's in and the makeup and his age, he kind of passes off for Charlton Heston a little bit. I can see that. He's got some of that look in his eye. He's got a much more square jaw. He was a cowboy in a lot of movies, and
was he on Bonanza? I don't know. I remember he screams cowboy to me.
He does.
And maybe that's because the thing that I am most familiar with him from is Old Yeller.
Yeah, of course.
Old Yeller was a movie that they used to show us in grade school all the time.
Oh my gosh.
And he was in that, and he's fine in this movie. Stephen King is a big fan of this movie, or at least was back in the day when he wrote his nonfiction book Danse Macabre about horror, and he really liked this movie, and he thought that the special effects were really compelling and that the story was interesting. He wasn't terribly fond of Chuck Connors' performance, but he said, it's not because I don't think that Chuck Connors is a good actor. I just think that he was maybe a little bit miscast in this movie. And I don't agree. I think he's fine in this movie, but I know that their first pick for his role was Jack Palance. And I totally understand why Jack Palance didn't take the part.
Yeah.
But had he taken the part, I think he might have brought a little bit of gravitas that Chuck Connors just doesn't quite have. Like, he's almost there. And I do enjoy him in this movie. I think he does a good job, especially since, here we go, we're 3 minutes in, 10 minutes in, whatever. Ultimately, he's kind of playing a dual role.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a surprise. I mean, I think it's projected a little bit. I don't know. He's creepy. I like the duality of his role because on the one hand, he plays this very helpful, charming, country kind of guy. And then on the other hand, he's this total freaking weirdo.
Yeah, which is good. I mean, a lot of people when they're casting these movies will purposely cast unknowns, right? Because they don't want the baggage that comes with the actor's prior work or whatever they've carved out for themselves. In this case, it kind of works to the advantage, right, of having this well-known actor who is usually kind of a hero type character, jovial, friendly, kind of macho guy.
Yeah.
But, he has that type, and he always has. And at this time, he had this notion anyway that he could reinvent himself as a sort of Boris Karloff type villain, who could play villain in a bunch of movies. And then he did play the villain in a few other films after this, and maybe fulfilled his goal, at least varying his output a little bit more and being able to prove he can do that. Like you said, I don't know. And some of it's the script. It gets into cheesy territory at times, but when you were talking about what is essentially a Norman Bates type character, right?
Yeah.
You got to play crazy, and you can kind of forgive about anything because we don't know what his particular psychosis is. And we get some ideas of where it's come from as the movie progresses. And I think the movie does actually a pretty good job of feeding us drip by drip a little bit more of his backstory as it goes along.
I think that I would have found the movie more boring if it weren't for the fact that the villain is so odd. Like, he's just so weird.
From the beginning, right?
He's so weird that it's compelling.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a slasher movie, basically.
Yeah.
And it's very typical, like you said, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, House of Wax, or at least the remake of House of Wax, where you've got a group of people, young people, 20-somethings or whatever, and they're out for a good time, and one of them gets a flat tire. They're traveling in 2 cars. The lead car gets a flat tire, and the guy whose car that is, Woody. I just have like this buff, handsome guy.
Yeah.
I wish they would have killed off Jerry first instead of Woody, because Woody was hot.
I was just gonna say, the minute that came on the screen, I was like, "Oh, Craig's gonna like this movie," and then he gets killed off, and I'm like, well, maybe we'll." I mean, he's like half shirtless, muscular. His shirt is pink. He's got
ripped,
this white
like
hat.
He's got abs for days.
Just rolling a tire down the street. Right for the picking, I guess.
So he's just rolling this tire down the road, and he comes up on this place. Like, it looks like a service station, but it looks like it's abandoned. So since nobody's there, he goes in the back, and it looks like somebody is sleeping, like on a cot or a bed. But when he goes and tries to wake it up, he's hearing like weird, kind of creepy voices. And when he tries to wake the person up, a mannequin like pops up and laughs, and then. I don't know how you could explain these events any other way than right away it appears supernatural.
Yeah.
Because the door slams and locks and nobody's there. The windows are opening and closing by themselves, keeping him out. A mannequin breaks through the window. Another one pops out of the closet. The mannequins are like laughing creepily.
Yeah.
And then a cabinet starts rattling and lights are flashing. And then debris starts flying out of the cabinet at Woody. And it looks really cool, like projectile flying out of this cabinet. And I read that the way that they did it was that they suspended the cabinet from the ceiling and just threw things straight down.
Yeah, just dropped them.
And change the camera perspective. But it looks really cool. But eventually a pipe shoots out and stabs him through the back. And then we just hear some weird man voice grumbling. Like he's saying things, but I couldn't even make out what he was saying.
It was so bizarre because you're trying to put
very bizarre.
You're trying to put your finger on what's happening. And of course the movie's called Tourist Trap, and so you're thinking that he's kind of gotten locked in this little puzzle room. There's nobody around, but then these things are happening and coming out. So my first reaction was, oh, okay, all these mannequins and things, they're all mechanical devices, and the door auto locks and that, and the window. And then once things start shooting out of the cabinets, you're like, well, okay, this is clearly supernatural the way this is going down. And I didn't even understand how his arm got caught in the door. It's like he poked a hole in it, was trying to open it from the other side, but something was holding his arm on the other side. It's just really unclear, except that all this crazy haunted house type shit is happening in the middle of the day. And once that pipe goes into his back, it's like he's dead. And the camera...
And we never see him again.
Yeah, and the camera just does this extremely slow pan down from his shocked face down to the pipe, and blood is already dripping out the end of it and across the floor and up and out the windows. And you're waiting for a reveal, you're waiting for something. And then all we hear is that sound of the laughter or whatever, mumbling, and then boom. We're back with the other car, which is driving down the street, and meets up with the person that he left at the car, who was Eileen. And we have a few other people in the car who are traveling together. So this is Jerry and Molly. And Molly is like this prim, proper, she's the girl you're thinking, okay, she's going to be the final girl because she's just... almost comically, right? She has like a hat on that's
annoyingly
a bonnet.
She looks like she stepped right out of the Little House on the Prairie.
Yeah.
Like, it's ridiculous. She literally kind of looks like Nellie Olson from Little House on the Prairie. She's obviously so prim. And whereas the other girls, Eileen, looks like a typical girl. She's very spunky. I liked her, and I liked that actress. But then you've got Becky, right?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that's the
Becky is Tanya Roberts, yeah.
And she is like, she's a sex pot, but at the same time, like, not trashy. Like,
no.
She's very, very curvy. And of course, she's wearing, skin tight, like, halter top and tight little cut off jean shorts or whatever.
Yeah.
Very, very sexy. But also, she seems nice.
Yeah.
Like, she's not trashy in her appearance. And it doesn't matter ultimately, but like, since we're talking about her, I think that's to her credit. She's very sexy without being trashy looking. And she was beautiful to look at.
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, I'm not ashamed to admit I was hoping we were going to see some nudity in this movie, and shockingly we didn't. I guess there was supposed to be.
They wanted it.
Yeah. But the director was too shy to bring it up until the scene where they all go skinny dipping, which is in about, another minute later. And they were all like, no, we're not doing that. So they're all, just submerged enough in the water to cover up all the naughty bits, as it were.
Right.
But her dirty pillows. But
well, yeah. which is fine.
Yeah,
like,
of course it's fine. We don't care.
It doesn't bother me at all. Nudity, of course, does not bother me at all, but the lack of nudity doesn't bother me either. And there's still plenty of eye candy for the male gaze. These are beautiful women.
Yeah.
We don't have to see them totally nude to appreciate their beauty. But
thank you for putting that disclaimer out there, Craig. We are two guys in a chainsaw, and I endorse this message.
But the other thing that leads to is that this movie is rated PG. And we don't do a lot of PG rated movies on this podcast.
No, we don't.
But this was also before Poltergeist, when the PG-13 rating came into existence. But the filmmakers, I don't remember if it was the producer or the director, really felt that PG rating killed them.
Yeah, and it probably did.
If they had somehow gotten an R. And they were surprised because they thought that the content was disturbing enough that it warranted an R.
Yeah.
But I guess because of the lack of sex and nudity, and really because there is violence, but it's not graphic.
No. It's a little brutal, but
it's brutal,
not filmed
but
in a brutal way. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that it did work out a little bit to their favor, and that they got some play on syndication on television out of this movie, apparently, because of the rating. So, maybe it made a little bit more money than it would have otherwise. I mean, there's a lot of creepiness. It's funny. I just put together, just today, hey, everybody, check out our website at twoguys.red40net.com, where I just put up a page called Family Friendly Horror Movies, where I just went back and categorized these movies that, what was it, last year? Right? We had the whole month where we did quote unquote kid friendly.
Yeah, like gateway horror.
Yeah, like that kind of stuff. And as I was going back and categorizing our content and remembering it, these are still horror movies, right? They're by definition, they're going to be scary. They're going to have disturbing things in them. Most of them have some level of or degree of violence in them. Or, whether it happens on screen or off screen, some blood, even a little bit of nudity, some language, but still, depending on the age of your kids and depending on the maturity level, the people in your house and things like that, a lot of these movies that we've done, a good 25 of them I found. I would say go and check it out first before you show it to your 12-year-old.
Sure.
But based on your own values. But in a general sense, they're not like the kind of stuff that we normally do here, where heads are getting lopped off and, arms. As ridiculous as it can be sometimes, it's still brutal and graphic and gross.
Right.
This is definitely one of those movies that you could watch with your family. It could come on TV and it would be just fine. Although it's still disturbing.
It is. And I think that there's like some nightmarish stuff in here. Like, not that I would ever have any reason or call to, but I could probably show this at school without having to send home a permission slip. I mean, it's PG. There's no graphic violence, really. But that doesn't mean that there's not some nightmarish stuff. Like, the villain is really very creepy. I wouldn't want him poking up in my dreams.
Right.
Yeah, okay, so it's PG. All right. Anyway, so they're all back together, and so they're basically, now that the second car has caught up, they continue down the road, and they're looking for Woody. And they find his tire abandoned, and they see all these signs for, like, Slosson's Lost Oasis. And one of the girls like, oh, these tourist traps are all alike, blah, blah, blah. Great, get the title.
Yeah.
They find his tire, and they drive by, and as they drive by, I feel like the wind from their drive-by, like, uncovers a sign that they don't see that says, like, close to the public, keep out.
Yeah.
Which is kind of weird, and I read who put up that sign. Is it somebody who knows the dangerous things that are going down here? Or another speculation is that it might be the villain himself, because like you said, it kind of appears to be this Norman Bates type of thing where he kind of has a dual personality.
Yeah.
Where one of his personas is kindly, and the other is murderous. So maybe he put it up himself. Who knows? But they pull up to this place, and the Jeep dies for no apparent reason. And I wouldn't have thought much of that, except for then while they're sitting there, for absolutely no reason, the headlight shatters too.
And it's like they don't even notice it, right? I mean, they're more concerned about the Jeep. And I'm thinking, oh, when are they going to notice the headlight shattering? How is this working? And how is this significant? And did it get shot out? It didn't. I mean, it's so weird, right? It's like, okay, clearly there's some supernatural thing happening here.
Exactly. Yeah. And ultimately that's what you figure out, that there is something supernatural going on here. And it's bizarre, and it doesn't really come to light until later, but it's obvious that something supernatural is happening. We do get a little bit of an explanation. It's not laid out for us like, oh, here's the exact science of why all this is happening. We just find out later that this guy has telekinetic powers. Why? We don't know. What's the extent of what he can do? We don't know. Like,
yeah, really.
He can just do stuff. And apparently he can disable their car to keep them there.
Yeah. And so then they kind of get out of the car, and the girls wander over the hill, and that's when they discover, oh my gosh, there's this beautiful, beautiful waterfall and a pond there. Eileen says, oh, I think we should go swimming. And Molly comes up in her bonnet and is like, but we don't have swimming suits. And they're like, well, that never doesn't need to stop us.
Oh, gosh.
But even in the beginning, right? The main character, Mr. Slauson, comes in and is pretty creepy because the girls are skinny dipping on his property. Molly is there. She's the one who notices these legs come over the hill first, and she's a little closer to the shore, and so he looks down at her and starts talking to her and asks her name. So, I mean, he's doing this as though he doesn't have three beautiful naked girls in front of him, and he's just chatting with them.
Used to be I'd charge 75 cents a day to swim here. Not no more, though. Used to be I'd have 25 or 30 visitors a day here. And then the government decided to build a new highway.
It's the old story, right, of though they put in that highway, and I guess folk just want to go fast nowadays, and they don't have time to slow down.
In fact, he says something like, ever since they put in the highway, we've lost all our business or something, which is a line lifted directly from Psycho.
Psycho, yeah.
But this part is funny to me because, yeah, he does show up, and I suppose you could consider it creepy that this man, is like leering over these girls. But again, like you said, they're under the water. They're not fully exposed.
Yeah.
And he's very friendly. He's not mean. He's not admonishing them. He's not yelling at them. He's friendly. And it's funny to me because as silly as this situation may sound, my maternal grandfather was a country man. He was a farmer. He was educated through the 8th grade, and then he went off and fought in World War II and came back and was a farmer his whole life, and he owned a lot of property. And this happened to him more than once, that he would have to go out and chase off skinny dipping kids off of his property. And he was always nice about it too. You know, I'm glad you're having fun, naked kids, but
okay, fair enough.
Skedaddle.
When you got a good thing, you know, if you build it, they will come.
Yeah, exactly. Apparently, if you live in the country and you have a pond, beautiful women will come and swim naked in it. I don't know.
The things you learn too late in life.
It's also, I mean, he's kind of charming. You know, it's cute. He's like, y'all best leave before it gets dark.
What happens at dark?
Well, this here hole fills up with water moccasins. If you feel something wiggling around your feet, it's just the early ones come to find a good spot.
It's just so funny. But they get out and they're talking about him, and they go back to the Jeep, and he's there waiting for them at the Jeep.
Yeah.
And they're all together now. Jerry's with them too, and he looks at the car and he says, "Oh, there's something wrong with it. We'll need tools." So he takes them back. I thought he was going to be taking them back to his house, because that's what he says. But it actually turns out to be like this roadside attraction, the Slauson Museum.
And he says he lives there.
He does say he lives there, which is weird, because somebody also notices that there's a big house just down the way.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Oh, nobody lives there but Davy." And they're like, "Davy?" And he's like, Davy Crockett. And he's got this whole, like, it's small, it's not big, but it's like, it looks like an old-timey, I know they still exist, but you don't see them very much, but those, you know, kind of Midwestern roadside attractions where you go in and pay
Tourist
$1
traps?
to see. Tourist traps, exactly. But they're kind of fun.
Yeah.
You know, I've always been kind of intrigued by these places. They're very kitschy and...
Like a wall drug or something like that, right?
Yeah. I've never been to Wall Drug, but I hear it's amazing.
Oh, man.
And I gotta go get me a raccoon skin cap from Wall Drug at some point in my life.
Have you ever been to House on the Rock?
I've driven by it, but I haven't been there.
Oh my God, that is the tourist trap to end all tourist traps. It's the most amazing, incredible thing I've probably ever seen in my life. I could go on and on about House on the Rock. Oh, yeah.
But this place, like, it seems like mostly mannequins, but he also talks about wax figures. And he talks about how his brother had been super, super talented at making these wax figures. And they do stuff, like he can flip switches and, like, they'll move. And, like, he's got the Davy Crockett one that, like, raises its rifle and fires and startles all of them. He's like, "Oh, yeah, that's always a popular one with the kids," or whatever. Mm-hmm. And it's not particularly impressive, really. Like, it mostly just looks like mannequins. But there's, I don't know, it's kitschy and fun.
It's kind of fun. I mean, it's the sort of thing that appeals to people in a different time, and back when that was, you know, when we didn't have high-tech animatronics, this kind of thing was kind of cute. Right. I love how he goes in, and he's got like a Dr. Pepper vending machine, and he just opens it up like you're going to change the stuff out and pulls the beers out to hand around to the kids. It's so funny. And, you know, actually, he goes back into talking about his brother a little bit more, talks about himself, you know, that how he went into the Navy and got kicked out of there, and then he got kicked out of jail, and he got kicked out about anything else in his life, and he and his wife just settled down and did this thing, and his brother is really talented making these wax figures and all that. And he's still around. He's just kind of what he says.
No, what he says is he's off in the big city.
Oh, that's right.
He says he's off in the big city making his living doing this. So supposedly he's not around. Well, so then Slauson leaves the girls and goes with Jerry to fix the Jeep. And he warns the girls not to wander outside. But this is after they've already noticed that there's that house out there. So as soon as they leave, Eileen's like, "You know what? Screw that. I'm going to go up to the house and see if there's a phone." And she goes over there and she hears a man talking, and she finds all these rooms filled with mannequins and dummies. and she starts hearing somebody whispering her name, and she's looking around, and this creepy figure, it's a big person, so I immediately thought it was a man. This creepy guy in this really creepy mask shows up. I don't even know how really to describe the mask, because it's not... I don't want to say Phantom of the Opera because it's not like that, but similar. I mean, it covers his whole face, but it's like two pieces. There's like a face plate and then like a chin plate so that he can still talk and his mouth moves, but it's very creepy.
It's very evocative of those wooden ventriloquist dummies, right? Where the jaw itself, but just below the mouth, kind of opens up and goes back and forth, whereas everything else, like the cheeks down to the jawline, are stationary.
Right.
I thought it was kind of nice, actually, that mask then is evoked in the mannequins around the house, because all these mannequins, they don't look like... I mean, I think they're supposed to, but not many of them look like finely detailed wax figures that look almost real. They mostly just look like department store mannequins. But then later on, their jaw detaches like the same way, and their mouths open up in this very unnatural way, which is super creepy. I mean, I think that could give you nightmares.
It could, but that's one of the things that I really like about this movie is that for the most part, they just look like mannequins, but oftentimes you see a lot of them at the same time. Like, you're looking down a hallway or something and like they're lining the hallway. And most of them just look like mannequins, but I thought that it was really cool filmmaking that every once in a while they would clearly stick actors in.
Yeah.
So, so some of them are strikingly lifelike because they are real people. And that only increases like in frequency as you move throughout, but it's jarring to kind of scan these mannequins and just kind of notice that, wait a second, that's a person.
It's funny that you call it cool filmmaking instead of cheap filmmaking.
Yeah.
But you're right.
It is cheap, but it has an excellent impact, I thought. I thought it was really creepy.
Well, it's true, especially because you still really are not sure what's going on, because you've seen all this mechanical stuff, but then we've seen this like supernatural stuff, and you don't really know what it's all about. And they play with that a little bit in this movie, I think. And whether it's intentional or it's just, low budget that kind of happens to work for the movie. You're right. It's like seeing what may be humans in there, because this is always in the back of your mind, right? I mean, who hasn't seen maybe many people haven't seen like the original House of Wax with Vincent Price, but it's, you're always wondering, okay, well, people are going to die. They're all these mannequins. Maybe they're actually people, maybe they're actually people covered up. And then as she walks into here, the eyes of these dummies are following her. They're turning and looking at her. They look really good. Could they be people, but just the eyes are able to move? It's really unsettling to see this happening. I mean, it's derivative and it's kind of classic haunted house type stuff, but it works, I think, in this setting. So this guy enters in, you're right, he's got this mask and he's running around breaking things. And then, like, again, the supernatural, it's like he's looking in different directions and it's causing dummies to fall off the wall on her or, look at her. And a chair just right up to her, which she flops down in and it spins around. And I think at this point I was like, okay, we're saying that he's telekinetic. Mm-hmm. This was the moment where I realized, all right, then he must be telekinetic. And so at least some of what's going on here isn't supernatural at all. He's just controlling it. Mm-hmm. But would he be controlling the individual eyes of all these dummies just for fun? That was still kind of going through my mind, like maybe there's still more to these dummies than that. And so it just added to this hodgepodge feel of the movie, He
kind of explains it later, so I feel like maybe I should hold off on talking about it. But Eileen gets apparently strangled by her own scarf. Mm-hmm. No hands pulling it, just you see it being tightened around her neck. Then the other girls marvel at a mannequin in the place where they are, that little shop, and they touch it and they say that it feels like real flesh, which I thought would pan out to be something, but they never really addressed that.
No.
Again. And then Slauson comes back and says that Jerry took the truck to town.
Super suspicious.
Super suspicious. And he talks about that mannequin that they're looking at, and he says that it was his wife and that she had died of cancer, and he loved her so much, and so he made this figure of her or whatever.
She was a good cook, a good worker, good everything.
Yeah.
Just like a woman should be.
And it's creepy. Like, he's got her, like, it's creepy. He's got her on display in, it looks like a doll box almost, like an open front, and it's
lights around
lit
it
all around.
Yeah.
It's kind of, I don't know.
But then,
I mean,
they're like, oh, she looked beautiful. And he says, she is beautiful.
yeah.
Okay, what does he mean, right? Is she in there somewhere? Or is she somewhere else? It's weird.
He notices that Eileen is gone, and they say she went outside. So he goes out looking for her, and he goes to the house. And this part is weird, because in the house, he's like, Davy, are you there? Davy, like he's looking for somebody. As it turns out, we find out that there is no Davy. He is Davy.
Yeah.
He's both. But this suggests to me that there is some disassociation. Maybe he really believes that they are two different people.
Yeah.
It's odd. But he finds Eileen, and like she's been turned into a mannequin. Weird.
Yeah.
Creepy.
That was weird. I wasn't sure how to parse that, really.
I mean, it makes no sense logically, but I think that it's kind of explained in the end. He's got these telekinetic powers. We just don't know what the extent or limits of his powers are, because he can do some weird shit. But I feel like that's jumping the gun. I'm trying to hold it back.
Well,
but Becky and they decide they want to go look for Eileen too, because Slauson hasn't come back.
So they leave and they go down to the house and they hear Eileen's laugh from inside, and they're like, oh, okay, Eileen is in there with Woody. So even though Molly is really, really reluctant to go in, Becky just goes up and decides to climb the trellis on the outside because there's a light on upstairs. I guess she decides that's better than trying the front door. And Molly, who I thought in like 3 triple takes, starts to walk to the woods, turns around, looks back, walks to the woods, turns around, looks back, walks to the woods, turns around, looks back, and finally decides, no, she's not gonna go. And I think she actually goes back, doesn't she, to the
she does,
the museum, while Becky goes inside. Now, I don't know about you, but I felt like the movie was very dark. Like visually dark.
Right, yeah.
Sometimes it was kind of hard to see, and it was very stylistically lit, but at times I just couldn't even see exactly what was going on, and I'm not even sure that was helpful. But yeah, she goes in there, and just like the others, she hears somebody whispering her name, and it's just she's surrounded by a room full of mannequins. And she goes to that chair. There's this mannequin there with the scarf tied around its neck. She turns around the chair or looks at the other side, and it looks like, again, sort of like Eileen, but it's got that mask thing on, and it reaches up and scares her. Now, was that him? Or was that with the mask on?
No, because it wasn't. Because he shows up behind her,
Oh, that's
too.
right, that's right.
And eventually he kind of jumps. Well, she sees Eileen, but then she also sees him in a seat, and she spins him around, and he does jump up at her.
Yeah.
But she runs away, and the door slams on its own, and then she's struggling with the door, but when she opens it, tons of mannequins like fall on her, and she's all bruised up, and the creepy guy, who the production people ended up calling Plasterface, as a play on Leatherface, which is pretty funny.
So like Leatherface.
She hits him with a mannequin arm, and like she hits him and he's out for a second. But then, God, this is the weirdest part of the movie. I was telling Alan about this last night. I'm like, then the mannequins all look at her and open their mouths and sing. Like, and they do this several times throughout the movie, and increasingly more as the movie goes on. Like, a mannequin will turn its head, its jaw will fall open, it'll go, ah. And they're like harmonizing with each other. And it is really super weird. Like,
it's weird.
Ephemeral. It's strange.
And this is where the movie diverges a little bit from me as far as like it's no longer creepy. It's just weird. After you see enough of these mannequins and their mouths opening and this thing, it's almost like a little bit too much for me anyway. And that's when I was like, okay, I'm just more puzzled than anything at what is going on and who's moving these. Is he still moving them? Is there still something to them that I don't know? But they're kind of piling on her and like literally piling on her, like just sort of falling on her.
Yeah.
I guess while he's kind of knocked out, he must still be controlling them, but he's supposedly knocked out.
But this is where, like, the movie kind of hits its... I don't want to say hits its stride, because it's been fine, but this is where things just kind of go off the wall.
Yeah, really.
We see the creepy mask face guy carry Becky down into the basement, where Jerry is tied up to a post, and there's a girl that we don't know tied to a table. And at this point, mask guy starts talking, and he talks in this really weird voice like this.
You know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of New Year's Evil. You remember that one? Where the guy's like, I'm evil.
So like he talks to this girl on the table who we don't know. He's like, "You're so pretty. Why don't you like me?" It's so weird. And the girl, after he goes upstairs, the girl's like, "He's crazy. We're all gonna die. He's gonna kill us. I was just getting gas and he grabbed me. I never even saw him coming." And like, the creepy guy gets himself all made up in a top hat and a cape and gloves and stuff, and he comes back with booze. He's like, "We're gonna have a party." And he straps her head down. He starts plastering her face, but he narrates the whole thing. Like,
Oh, your face is burning now. The plaster's getting tied on. Your world is dark. You'll never see again. It's getting hard to breathe, isn't it? I'm going to seal the last openings. You won't be able to breathe, but you won't suffocate.
and then finally, like, he covers up her mouth and nose, and she dies. And he says, "Now you're one of us." But Jerry has been
chewing through his ropes, literally, like a cartoon character.
And he does get out, and he attacks him.
And let me just say, like, this is very kind of Phantom of the Opera, kind of Abominable Dr. Phibes vibe. And the music here, the music is like a score from another era.
It's so bizarre, but because it's so bizarre, I really like it.
I mean, of course, this movie's from another era, but I mean another era from this movie. Like, the score felt like it fit in oftentimes more with, like, 1950s Vincent Price movies. This overly...
Or like Babes in Toyland, or... Yeah. It's weird.
It kind of runs the gamut. Like, even in the earlier part of the movie, it's kind of bouncy and groovy. It was scored, actually, by a man named Pino Donaggio, which they had to convince to do, because he had scored Carrie a couple years before this. And he did Piranha. He went on to do, like, Dress to Kill, The Howling, a ton. I mean, this guy's huge in this, you know, as far as scoring. Scored Hercules, Body Double, a lot of horror movies, a lot of Italian films, some giallo picks, a couple that we've already seen, all the way up through the 80s and 90s, 2000s. He's still scoring movies now. And producers of the film, or I think the director of the film, was ultimately kind of disappointed. They really wanted more of a synth type score, you know, like John Carpenter kind of Halloween type score. And they got this kind of minimalist orchestral kind of score that when you hear it, especially in moments like this, it's totally Carrie. You know, it's like The Fury, it's like Carrie. Well, of course, you've scored some of Brian De Palma's movies. It sounds so much like that, and it sometimes just feels a little out of place with what's supposed to be, you're thinking, a grittier late 70s, early 80s, freaky Texas Chainsaw Massacre kind of movie. But it never really reaches that level, and part of that, I think, has to do with the score.
I liked the score just because it was so bizarre that it had almost like a jarring effect. Like, it caused unease. Like, it made me uneasy just because it was so weird and strange. I don't know. I meant to say something about it at the very beginning, because at the very beginning, it's almost like clockwork or machine work, like clicky clanky kind of stuff.
It's bouncy
it's
and
weird.
kind of groovy too. I mean, it's really weird, yeah. But you're right. So that was so corny, though. I'm going to put this on your face, but it's not going to kill you, even though I'm covering your nose and mouth. What's going to happen is your heart is going to beat so fast it's going to explode, and you're going to die from fright. Like, really? Maybe just his telekinetic powers made that happen, because I don't think that's actually a medically reliable way to kill somebody. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, he's just putting pizza dough on her face. Like,
yeah, literally, that's what it is. Yeah,
she'd probably be okay. But
yum.
It's just so strange. Like, he's so odd that it worked for me. Like, I thought that it was very creepy. The next, I feel like 10, 15 minutes is a lot of him just chasing people around.
It's important to note, though, that after his fight with Jerry, he like frickin' lifts Jerry up the wall like he's a superhuman.
Yeah. People can do that in movies.
Yeah, they do that all the time. But then he, again, like Jerry's bound up again, and he's sitting at the table, and he goes on kind of a long diatribe again about his brother. And he's just talking about, oh yeah, his brother thinks he's more handsome than me. He makes me wear this mask on my face because I'm actually more handsome than him. And I hate my brother and I want to kill my brother. And it goes on like that. And I'm thinking, could the movie be that simple? That, yeah, this is just his crazy brother, Davy. That's kind of what I was thinking was happening here. And I was like, okay, he's got this telekinetic brother.
Well, that's where that comes in, because he drops a key and Jerry sees it and he tries to retrieve it, but the mask face guy sees and moves it with his mind. And then he explains, I have this power and my brother doesn't like me to use it. And he goes on to say, but it feels good when I use it. He says, but it also scares me because sometimes I don't even know what I'm doing. So, like, he does... It's as though he doesn't even have full control of it, which I think explains why some of the times where it appears where he's out, he continues to still have this influence. Like, he doesn't even understand it.
Oh, that's deep.
He can seemingly do just about anything. But again, lots of running around, running through the forest. He chases Molly through a forest. She jumps over a fence. He has a mannequin head that talks, and he keeps saying, like, meet my friend. Like, throws it at her. It's so weird. And
it's just the point at which she gets picked up by Slauson. Like, Slauson just suddenly pops up. It's like, what are you doing here? Oh my gosh, we got to get you to safety. And he, picks her up in his truck and he drives her back, and she says, oh, I've been chased by this guy who's wearing a mask. And he goes, oh my God, that's my brother.
He goes on a whole thing like, he always wanted to be like me. He always wanted everything I had, including
it's the opposite.
my face. Like,
yeah, it's just a parallel dialogue from what we heard before. Yeah. And it's too much, really. I mean, it's just too much explanation through dialogue with these things. Anyway, he takes her back to the museum, and even though she's never shot a gun before in her life, just hands her a rifle and says, now you stand out here while I go inside, and if he comes, you shoot him. And she's like, well, I've never shot anything. He's like, oh, you just aim it and pull the trigger. Well, it is a shotgun, actually. So, yeah, I guess that's maybe all you need to know if you don't care about kickback.
I was just, like if it's like a 22, that'd be fine.
Yeah. But then he shows up. The masked guy.
The
creepy guy immediately shows up and starts walking towards her. And she shoots him twice at point blank range. And each time he just kind of stands up and comes towards her more. So she whacks him in the face with the rifle. And the face mask shatters. And it's Slauson. So you're like, oh, okay. And for me, this was actually a bit of a reveal. I mean,
me too.
I kind of thought maybe, but I was, it was just one of many little possible explanations. But I was genuinely a bit shocked to see that was him. And even for a moment, I thought, well, maybe they're just twins or something, played by the same actor, because they play a trick on you. Even in the credits, they show a different name, which is just a non-existent name for who plays Davy. But yeah, so she goes running. She kind of runs away. She kind of backs into the forest and just sort of absent-mindedly backs into a pond. And suddenly, inexplicably, behind her, like he's been waiting under the water this whole time, he slowly rises up with this spooky, evil, goofy movie villain grin on his face, and wild eyes, and grabs her and takes her. I thought, come on.
It makes no sense, but it looks really cool. Like
It did
it's
look
very
cool.
creepy.
Yeah.
When he comes up out of the water
But it made no
behind her
sense.
and she's totally oblivious, totally creepy. Anyway, they all end up back at the place and like now we know he's both people and so now he's totally weird and he's like putting on different masks and playing with dolls and the mannequins, he interacts with them. Like he has dinner with one of them and it talks to him and he puts food in its mouth and then its head falls off. So like it's bizarre. Like he can completely animate these things. And Jerry and Becky are running around and Becky ends up getting killed. One of those shooting mannequins shoots her, or no, throws a knife in the back of her head.
Mm-hmm.
But he has Molly, and like Molly wakes up like a fever dream, and she sees some woman like taking care of her. Ultimately, it ends up being a mannequin, but it looks like a real person. And I read that was the director's wife. Who played that role, and she had lines, and he cut them, and she never forgave him. I thought that was hilarious.
It is hilarious.
But it just turns out that it's just this really surreal thing where he's controlling all of these mannequins, and they can move about and talk and do all kinds of weird things. And it ends up in a showdown where Jerry, he's got Molly. Oh, and this part was super creepy. He's like, "You're so pretty, and wasn't my wife pretty? And you remind me of her." And he puts a mask of the wife on her face and then tries to kiss her. And it's so creepy and uncomfortable. And she's crying. But then Jerry shows up and like comes in. It's like, "Come on, I'm going to take you out of here." And Slosson's just standing there. She's like, "Come on, Jerry, let's go." And it's like he can't move. And Slauson walks over him and to him and just takes his arm off.
Yeah.
Like he's a mannequin. And then grabs his head, grabs the actor's head and twists it. And in a cut, obviously, it becomes a mannequin. And he pulls his head off and throws it down. And then what happens in this part, it's like we come to realize apparently he can make these mannequins turn into people.
Yeah.
And he can make them do things. And I've skipped things because we're nearing the end of our time. And like, there's a great part where Becky and Jerry pretend to be mannequins and kind of fool him. And this is where it gets really creepy, where you really can't tell which ones are people and which ones are mannequins. And I'll never let this kind of cameo go. Linnea Quigley is a uncredited mannequin in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And she's my girl, so I'll always shout her out. But it's so bizarre. And like, he picks up one of the mannequins, a lady mannequin, and he starts dancing with it. And like in various cuts, it's a mannequin and then it's a real woman. And all of the mannequins are like laughing at Molly. And eventually she grabs an axe and axes Slauson in the neck, and then he dies and all of the activity ends. And then it just closes up on her face and she screams. And the last shot of the movie is her driving away in the Jeep with all of her friends, but they're mannequins.
Yeah.
I love that. That last shot of the movie, as grainy as it is, might be my favorite. Because she's got this big smile on her face. It's almost like she's just mad. Like... I rushed through that last part. Like, Slauson talks about how he had killed his brother and his wife because he had found them cheating and blah, blah, blah. And then he's also like, but I didn't really want to kill them. Like, they try to make him, like, he's crazy, but kind of sympathetic, but not, and then whatever.
Yeah.
But, ultimately in the end, I thought it was a creepy movie. It was I found it very creepy. All of the mannequins doing their, and like turning their heads and their jaws dropping and moving about and then ultimately like turning into animated people. It was very creepy. The whole plot point of this masked killer also having these unexplainable telekinetic powers. Like you said, it is a hodgepodge of so many things. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Psycho, Carrie, all of these things. But in being that hodgepodge, it's unique. Yeah. And it's unlike anything else I've seen in some ways. And though I don't think it's a great movie, I don't think the production value is great. The acting is fine, nothing amazing. But I think it's just an interesting gem of a horror movie. And for real horror fans, I would say, oh yeah, watch it.
It is in being a hodgepodge, like you said, there's nothing you've ever seen like it, yet there's so many things you've already seen like it. But it, like we said earlier, it just the whole is the sum of its parts is just utterly bizarre. And it feels like a movie that I would have seen on a Saturday afternoon after cartoons on TV.
Yeah.
It just has that feel.
Or really late night, yeah.
I wouldn't say it ever really scared me too much, but it was creepy. And I suppose if I was younger and I'd watched it or less experienced with horror movies, it would have provided some nightmare fuel for me.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I mean, yeah, I think, again, if you're a horror fan or a fan of Tanya Roberts or Chuck Connors or any of these people, yeah, watch it. But I wouldn't say put it high on your list unless you're just into this kind of thing, these kind of weirdo, psycho killer kind of movies that's not going to be gross or gory. It's very PG. And it's also the seeds, right, of future Charles Band productions. This movie became a cult hit for a while and probably has influenced, Puppet Master, Dolls, Demonic Toys,
yeah.
Those themes that he keeps revisiting and continues to milk, and so this idea had legs, and he's explored these in different forms, I think, even with the same director, right? He did a lot of the Puppet Master movies, and I think wrote one of them, if not the first one. So yeah, very, very interesting film, and a nice tribute to Tanya Roberts. She's in a lot of this movie. She's a perfectly fine actress.
May she rest in peace, yeah.
Yeah, may she rest in peace. I was really disappointed to hear that those electric blue eyes of hers are basically just contacts, and she wore those pretty much her whole career.
Whatever. She looks good.
Yeah, she did. No big deal, right? Do what you got to do. Well, thank you again for listening to another episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it with a friend. You can find us online, twoguys.red40net.com. You can also just search for Two Guys and a Chainsaw on Facebook. We have a Twitter account as well. Let us know what you thought of this film. Give us some other suggestions of movies to do. And until next time, I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
With Two Guys and a Chainsaw.